Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of the Questyle CMA18 Portable. And the review is titled Winning in Style. I've always had a thing for the name Questyle Audio Engineering. I mean, their logoization is just stunning. I really like the lettering, the font selection of Questyle. I am into these sorts of little things. I've been to art, in a major way, so that's perhaps why. And I often find a lot of art in their products. This product is switched on. It's a portable DAC amp. I hope you can see the LED lights here indicating gain. And of course, whether you're using balanced or you're using Bluetooth, etc., optical. So it does have a plethora of features and outputs. So it is a very interesting device that I'm very excited to talk about. And in the course of this discussion, I'll be drawing comparisons with the iFi Griffon, which is a wonderful device, which I personally happen to own. I use it to drive IMs, but it also drives some headphones really well, with the exception of planars. This, of course, is the Grand Maestro, which was one of my testing units. And a lot of people, I don't think, have figured out the Grand Maestro, because some people are saying it's muddy, some people are saying it's bright, and what is it? Guys, it really depends on whether you have the vocal switch on and what modules you have on, because the 4 different tuning profiles on the Grand Maestro, I think, to my mind, make this a keeper. So this review is forthcoming, but I'm going to talk about this a bit, how this sounds across these devices. I'll also talk about my Sony DAP, the Sony W1ZM2, which is of course my favorite DAP, and I keep talking about this. And ever since I've had this, guys, I've not wanted to really own anything else. And I've tried a lot of things. I still own a bunch of other DAPs that I probably should have brought here for the sake of comparison. But in any case, I'll also talk about the PB5 from iBasso, the Osprey, and what it does. What does amplification do to a DAP is also a question I'll try to cover. So this is broad-ranging, freewheeling discussion. My Utopia will make a sneak peek, and it'll I'll talk about how Utopia sounds on some of these, especially the Questyle, as well as my Sennheiser HD650, my trusty HD650, which I've talked about in the past. I've praised it. I've also criticized it. Okay, to jump right in. So first and foremost, guys, Questyle is a very consistent brand. I can't think of a single dud. I can't think of a single product that's just, not done well, that's bombed in the market. The recent dongles, have been quite well received. So they've had the CMA15, which is a pretty awesome desktop amp. So they even do desktop amps, right? So they start with dongles, and they do now portables, and all the way to very high-end sort of beautifully designed and beautiful sounding desktop devices. So a lot of you, however, know Questyle through the M15 portable dongle DAC amp and the M12, because M12 and M15 actually, I think, became quite popular, and those devices, I think, catapulted Questyle's name recognition and sort of liking that people developed towards it, especially in the Western market, because people in Southeast Asia, Singapore, and even China, I think, already know and love Questyle. It is not a typical Chi-Fi product. As a matter of fact, no one calls Questyle Chi-Fi. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of even Westerners will gravitate towards it, especially even those that sort of, tend to buy Summit 5 products. Okay, so essentially, let's just dive into specs, talk about connectivity options, battery capacity. I'll talk a bit about build quality, and then we'll move on to sound, some comparisons, and then of course I'll talk about how it drives certain headphones and IEMs and all that. So in terms of its internal architecture, this has an AKM 4493 SEQ, which is a very, very welcome change for me from the previous ESS Sabre chips they used in the M12 and M15 dongles, which of course were more budget-oriented devices. Guys, I will be drawing heavily on my notes as I review this that I have co-developed with my partner in rhyme. So I have a very intelligent audiophile working with me on my channel, as a lot of you might know. His name is Bongo Bilai, and he's already dropped review of this on HeadFi, and I urge you to check it out. So as I said, this has AKM 4493 chips, and as a matter of fact, it's equipped with 4 sets of patented PCD class current mode SIP chips, which of course they mention here as well, CMA SIP inside. A peak power of 1 watt at 32 ohms, which is a lot, because that makes it as powerful as this device. I mean, portables don't end up becoming so powerful. Like this is 1 watts, the PB5 Osprey It's about 1.7 watts, right? So this is the Osprey, and it's a beautiful device. You can see the new tubes gleaming through this glass panel. So this is 1 watts, 1.7 watts. So this will drive almost anything, with the exception of, let's say, a very difficult to drive planar. And of course, Qstyle does have bespoke current mode amplification technology. So you do sometimes, or often, or usually get more bang in terms of your drive for your buck. And in terms of formats, it does support up to PCM 768 kilohertz at 32 bits, and DSD 512 playback is also provided by this nifty device. And Qstyle has decided to drop MQS support for this device, which is interesting. It's priced at $700. Interesting price point. It's well below $1,000, but higher than, let's say, the $300 to $400 range. Connectivity options wise, as I talked about, this has a lot of connectivity options. This has optical Toslink. This has Bluetooth options, aptX HD, and LDAC. It has a vinyl to digital recording function, which is interesting. And of course, you can see the 3.5 and the 4.4 millimeter outs. And even this sort of artwork here, where you see these sort of picture of these XLR interconnects or barrels, is so nicely and neatly done. I really like it. It's like a miniature art thing going on here. So really nicely done, high quality finish. It's obviously very stunning. It's compact. It's just, you know, a little bigger than my palm. It's a very thin design, still housing a pretty capable battery. So battery, basically, this has a 4300 mAh battery inside. So a runtime of up to 10 hours, and only takes 2.5. 2.5 is perhaps not only, but it takes 2.5 hours to charge from 0 to 100%. So the charging is not, you know, super fast. Neither is it super slow. I think it's pretty standard, pretty decent. But the runtime of 10 hours is magnificent. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit about its aesthetics and all that. I hope the lighting does this justice, because it's very reflective, the glass, and it hasn't really troubled me with fingerprints and such. But it is beautiful. So there is no status screen, as is evident, and you sort of assess your status through the tiny LEDs that shine through that I just showed you. The separate LEDs here that, you know, sort of typify different inputs. So 4 separate LEDs will light up, indicating volume level, decrease, increase, or charge level. And it's not as exhausting as it sounds, because it actually took me just not, you know, 5 to 10 minutes to get up to speed with this. Of course, it's very pretty, like I keep talking about it. The outer body features sandblasted aviation-grade aluminum surfaces with silver high-gloss buttons, as is pretty evident, and Corning glass coatings on both the front and the back panels. So this is glass, so it can break, so keep that in mind. And of course, it has this very interesting gradient dot design, which adds an element of, you know, I guess aesthetic enhancement to this overall compact form factor. So that's it for aesthetics. Now, guys, sound wise, it's difficult to talk about the sound of anything, right? It's easier to talk about the sound of an IM or transducers, but these all have a certain sonic trait. They all have a certain sonic character. So what is it? So if I start with the Sony W1ZM2, which you can see is now being bi-amped with the PB5 Osprey, I'll just switch it off. So as to say battery life, so I can listen to it after this review, perhaps. I mean, this is honestly one of my favorite products, but this review is about this guy. So the Sony is a warm, sort of rotund bass driven sound with massive soundstage. And the massiveness of soundstage, I think to some extent, makes for not a diffuse presentation in the sense that images lack core body, but it's just diffuse. It is diffuse in the best sense of the word, and you get great bass, you get great mid-range richness, and you even get a very decent quality and presence of treble, a great quality and decent presence. It's not the brightest DAP, and it can sometimes slow down your music a bit, because the transient response just tends to have a certain amount of romanticism to it. That's a Sony sound, which I love. The PB5 makes for a bigger sound. It just adds a lot of width, even to this wide stage, and a lot of depth and more bass impact. People have measured it, and this apparently gives you a discernible sub-bass boost. The iFi Griffon, on the other hand, is a very typical iFi sound, except it says not as narrow as sometimes iFi products can sound. This has a warm, a thick, a lush, bassy presentation. and it's pretty well put together, so it doesn't sound as disjointed as some other hi-fi products can. So overall, it's warm and thick and all that, right? So I would say that of all the products on this table, this sounds the most neutral. This sounds by far the most neutral to me, but it's AKM style neutral, so it's a neutral bit of with a bit of syrupy warmth. The warmth does shine through in the mid-bass region. The bass here is pretty fantastic. It does remind me of the Sony in some ways, because with both these products, I get a very balanced mid-range warmth. I get a very solid rotund bass. I do get a sense of mid-bass and sub-bass shining through. And I get treble that's not rolled off, but has decent presence, but really high quality. Of course, the Sony will beat the CMA18P in terms of how wide this sounds, and I think this is more resolving. So that's overall sort of an overview of the sound. So now to sort of get into a little more detail, guys, the bass response honestly is very impressive. It's I wouldn't say it's the snappiest, but it does have a whole lot of texture, and I feel that there's nothing at this price point of $700 to $1,000 that can give the kind of texture that this does. And by texture, I mean a lot of nuances. For example, you hear separation of, notes from kick drums and notes from bass guitars very well. So kick drums are often very well separated from bass guitars, even when, their musicians are going at each instrument with equal gusto. You get a substantial bass impact with this. So the bass drops on songs from Massive Attack and other trip hop or hip hop bands, and even some rock and metal bands. I mean, the bass drop is just incredible on this. Mid-range is something where I think Questyle has really stepped up its game, because a lot of their even full-size devices I don't think had the best mid-range. So I owned the portable CMA12, and that was interesting. That was a nice sounding device, which didn't drive the Utopia very well in terms of synergy, at least, because the mid-range was a bit lacking in soul, lacking in warmth, lacking in richness. And even the portable devices Questyle came out with later, the dongles, the M12 and M15, also had this sort of, lacking mid-range. The mid-range was ever so slightly digital. This does not have that issue. This has perhaps the best mid-range Questyle has ever produced, and I say that without any sort of hesitation, because this mid-range is awesome, guys. This is actually comparable to the Sony in mid-range. And finally, in terms of treble, like I talked about, it's not extremely present, but it's there. But it's not the sort of thing that I think comes alive with very warm sounding IEMs and headphones. So I have my HD650 handy here. So the 650 does sound incredible, because it's a good sounding product, and it does respond to amplification and good quality amplification, and you do get good quality amplification here. This is as good as any $1,000 DAP, and I would even go as far as to say this is as good as any $1,500 DAP. It certainly beats any FIO product in the sub $2,000 range, is what I would say, because most FIO products I've tried in the sub $2,000 range even have a digital glare to the treble, and this does not. So I like this a lot with this, and I get a great sense of bass punch in the mid bass, because I do think that this is a bit tricky. Like the bass here is. So the bass punch here will never rival that of, let's say, a CMF or an Abyss or even a Utopia. But I somehow feel that the bass punch here just gets enhanced on this device, which is something that I think a lot of you HD650 aficionados are looking for. A lot of HD650 aficionados want this to have slightly more bass, because the mid-range here is already amazing for its price, or perhaps for any price. The treble here a lot of you like, because a lot of you will like a warm sound, especially if you're treble sensitive, which I think is most audiophiles. I think most audiophiles are treble sensitive. If you consider the sort of the larger sample of audiophiles, not necessarily those listening to high-end products, because I do think high-end products give you or orient you to more treble. With that being said, this is a fantastic headphone, high-end or not, and it does pair really well with this, with the exception of the fact that the treble doesn't necessarily get really benefited by this, as compared to, let's say, the treble on the PB5, on the other hand, right? This has a very lively treble. This, of course, is an amp, but this does aid the treble presentation of the Sony and make the treble a little airier. So that's what I feel the PB5 does. So when I A/B between the two, this and this, more sort of overbuilt, super spec'd out combo, this sounds a lot wider and airier on this than it does on this. However, it does sound plenty wide, I have to say, and wider than on any dongle a lot of other low-priced JDS or shit DAC amps do not do to the 650 what this can. So I would recommend this over any sort of full-size stack sub $500, guys, that I've come across. Whether it's the Magni Modi, whether it's JDS, some of the JDS stuff that's almost any JDS stuff, honestly. This, I think, is not a great pairing because this sounds a little overly warm on the Griffon. So yeah, I mean, in terms of comparisons and overall treble performance, I think this is very good with the 650, but I wouldn't drive the 650 with this, mostly because I'm someone who's not become so accustomed to treble, and I sort of crave treble. I'm almost a treble head, almost. I'm not someone who would ever like a Ragnar from Noble Audio, by the way. So I'm not an extreme treble head, but I do like treble, so keep that in mind. I think it's essential for reviewers to disclaim and sort of acknowledge their leanings in terms of FR, so that people understand. Like, a lot of people are treble sensitive and they gravitate towards Harman, and they keep pushing Harman as sort of the gold standard, which I think is honestly unfair. So I don't want to do that. So just so you know, I can handle treble. So the fat-free Grand Maestro, this is an IM that I bought with my own money from Singapore, and it is a goddamn winner. A lot of people have talked about it. I will review it and do a more in-depth review of this and talk about what it sounds like across a variety of source chains. It's not as easy to drive, so it doesn't pick up any hiss from a powerful device like this. This is fantastic, and I think this is perhaps best married to this product because, especially with these tips and with my configuration of vocal switches and the black module, because on this, the CMA18 slams hard. Its treble comes through. It's just wide and it's huge and it's just engulfing and it's a fantastic presentation. If you're driving only IMs, sometimes this will give you almost as much soundstage width as the Sony, which is ridiculous because this is the widest sounding product I've ever heard in portable. Okay, so in terms of other things that I think are worth sharing, I did drive the Utopia with the Qstyle as well. The Utopia, of course, is a more high-end headphone. This is the Utopia 2022 version, and it's a fabulous, fabulous headphone. I've already reviewed it. I still have a slight bias or preference for the original Utopia because I did like the imperfections of the original Utopia, which I think this tried to correct, and in the process, I think this lost some of its identity. So this wants to be smoother than the OG Utopia, which I think takes away from the excitement of the OG Utopia and all that, right? I even think the OG Utopia had more life-sized imaging. So for whatever reason, I think this does pair really well with the Utopia. So because, again, the Utopia is a product that doesn't always have the best or smoothest treble, even though this is smoother than the OG, pairs really well with this because the treble really, really sounds present and detailed and airy and very textured and nuanced and lifelike, and it's a goddamn winner. The mid-range, again, sounds more organic than it does on most devices because the Utopia mid-range can be ever so slightly metallic. On this, it just works beautifully, and the bass punch becomes tighter. This Utopia can have a bit of a dodgy bass depending on what you're driving it with. Sometimes it will sound sub-bass light, it will graph like it's sub-bass light, and then on other products the sub-bass is just filled out. On this, the sub-bass is very filled out, so this is a pretty nifty device if you like sub-bass. And I haven't driven a lot of super sensitive product IMs with this product, but some people have. And so you might want to check out other reviews about how this fares with super sensitive IMs. But in my collection of IMs that I have, the Jewel, there's the Supermoon, and a bunch of others that I've tried with this. This has held up admirably, and as I would say, this is perhaps my favorite Qstyle product till date, and I highly recommend this, guys. I recommend this without the slightest doubt. So that's it for me, guys. I hope this review was useful. If you like this video, give it a like. If you like my work, please follow my channel, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye-bye.